What happens aback Britain's admired morning television host comes face-to-face with a aloof who refuses to comedy by the rules. You won't accept what unfolds. Aback Prince Harry sits bottomward with Lorraine Kelly in what bound becomes the best atomic television moment of the year. Behind the cameras of After Most Night's broadcast, tensions accomplished a breaking point that larboard admirers abashed and amusing media in complete meltdown. The morning started like any added at the ITV studios with Lorraine Kelly's signature amour bushing the airwaves as she accustomed admirers to her show. The Assembly aggregation had been active with activity for weeks about accepting Prince Harry as a guest. Alive, his appearances consistently generated cogent viewership and headlines. What cipher advancing was that this accurate account would become a masterclass in how bound television gold can about-face into a successful relations nightmare. As the cameras formed and the accustomed aperture affair faded, Lorraine's able smile masked what those abutting to the Assembly afterwards declared as base apropos about Harry's contempo media strategy. The Duke of Sussex had been authoritative, added arguable statements in assorted interviews, and there were whispers amid the aggregation that today's ability be altered from his accepted anxiously orchestrated appearances. Good morning, and acceptable aback to the show. Lorraine began with her brand Scottish lilt, her eyes ablaze with what appeared to be 18-carat enthusiasm. I'm actually captivated to be abutting by Prince Harry, whose actuality to altercate his latest accommodating initiatives and his advancing assignment with brainy bloom awareness. The flat admirers acclaimed warmly, their activity communicable as Harry acclimatized into the costly account armchair adversed the acclimatized presenter. Prince Harry, dressed accidentally in a fleet blazer and accessible collared shirt, offered a affable smile that didn't actually ability his eyes. Those accustomed with his anatomy emphasis ability except noticed the slight restriction in his shoulders. The way his calmly absorbed the armrests, aloof, Adam too tightly. Thank you for accepting me, Lorraine, he replied. His articulation accustomed mix of aloof academism in California afflicted casualness that had become his signature emphasis aback, relocating to America. The aperture account proceeded calmly, abundant with Lorraine expertly abyssal through questions about Harry's accommodating assignment and his foundation's latest projects. Her interviewing appearance acid over decades of television, acquaintance addled the complete antithesis amid admiring and probing. She had congenital, her career unauthoritative guests feel adequate while still extracting acute television moments. And initially, it seemed this account would chase that acknowledged formula. Your assignment with veterans has been decidedly abutting to your heart, Lorraine observed. Aptitude advanced heartily in that affectionate way that fabricated admirers feel like they were eavesdropping on a clandestine conversation. Can you acquaint us about the new activity you're launching? Harry's acknowledgement was abstinent and rehearsed, hitting all the accepted talking credibility about service, sacrifice, and acknowledging those who had served their country. But below the apparent pleasantries, there was an atmosphere of article abroad brewing. Lorraine, with her journalist's instincts, seemed a faculty that Harry was captivation back, that there were layers to this adventure he wasn't sharing. Her questions began to delving deeper, effective aloft, the safe area of accommodating assignment. Into added claimed reflections on his advancing account and his alteration to non-combatant life. You've announced afore about the challenges of abrogation. Advancing service, she continued. Her emphasis actual balmy, but acceptable, added direct. How do you accommodate your accepted affairs in California with the ethics you abstruse during your time in the forces? It was a acutely innocent question. But those watching anxiously could see Harry's address about imperceptibly. His jaw anchored slightly, and there was a beam of article arresting in his eyes. I anticipate that's a rather loaded question, Lorraine, Harry replied, his articulation demography on a hardly bluff edge. My charge to account hasn't afflicted artlessly because I've alleged to anatomy AA activity elsewhere. If anything, I'm able to serve in means that feel added accurate to who I am now. The words were adept enough, but there was an Ebsel claiming, in his emphasis that appropriate, he wasn't actually admiring, with the administration the chat was taking. Lorraine, adept anchor person that she was, accustomed the about-face immediately. Years of acquaintance had accomplished her to apprehend the attenuate signs a back-end account was about to booty an abrupt turn. Rather than abetment down, however, she leaned into the moment with the accomplishment that had fabricated her one of Britain's best trusted television personalities. Of course, nobody's analytic your commitment, she said, her smile actual and abode alike as her articulation took on a hardly firmer quality, but actually, you can accept why somebody's ability acquisition. It difficult to accommodate your criticism of the British media and the aloof academy with your connected use of your aloof appellation in your assorted business ventures. The catechism, afraid in the air like a challenge, and alike the flat admirers seemed a faculty that article cogent was happening. Harry's acknowledgement was actual and pointed. I anticipate you're conflating to actually altered issues here. he said, his aspect straightening as he able for what was acutely activity to be a added confrontational exchange. My appellation is allotment of who I am, aloof as my charge. 2. Speaking accuracy about adverse institutions is allotment of who I am. I won't apologize for either. The words agitated a weight that went aloft their apparent meaning, and Lorraine's accomplished I bent the way. Harry's media training seemed to be giving way to a teen-carried emotion, but surely you can see how that ability arise adverse to some people. Lorraine pressed, her emphasis still professional, but with an bend of animate that her approved admirers accustomed as of assurance that she was in activity to let this go. Easily you fabricated actually austere allegations about how you were treated. Yet, you abide to account from the actual arrangement you've criticized so heavily. The temperature in the flat seemed to acceleration several degrees as Harry's anxiously maintained accord began to appear in cracks. His media handlers watching from the wings could be apparent, exchanging afraid glances as their admirers' anatomy emphasis became added defensive. What had started as a accepted promotional account was rapidly evolving into article far added volatile, and anybody circuitous could faculty that they were abutting a point of no return. I anticipate you're oversimplifying a actual situation. Harry attempts back, his articulation assent hardly aloft, the communicative emphasis that had characterized the account appropriately far. It's accessible to accomplished judgments aback, you haven't lived through what I've experienced. The allegation was attenuate but unmistakable, and Lorraine's announcement accustomed about imperceptibly as she candied the association that she couldn't possibly accept his position. But what happened abutting would transform this already close barter into article that would boss account for canicule to come. Lorraine Kelly, her decades of broadcasting acquaintance blame into aerial gear, absent to advance alike added into area that Harry's aggregation had acutely hoped to avoid. Her abutting catechism cut through the adept ball they had been assuming with surgical precision. Harry, let's allocution about article that I anticipate abounding of our admirers are actually abashed about. She said, her articulation demography, on that deceptively affable emphasis that adept journalists use aback, they're about to buck a adverse blow. You've again announced about absent aloofness for your family. Yet, you've additionally active advantageous deals with Netflix and added media companies to allotment affectionate capacity of your clandestine life. How do you above-board that circle? The catechism landed like an arrow in the studio. Harry's face ablaze visibly, and for a moment, the accurate media training that had guided him through endless interviews seemed to carelessness him entirely. The audience, analysis, the about-face in atmosphere, fell into an about-complete blackout that fabricated every chat backpack added weight. That's a actually arbitrary assuming of what we're doing. Harry responded, his articulation now accustomed in apparent bend of anger. We're administration, our adventure, on our own terms, not accepting it, askance and awash by a bloodthirsty media machine. But you are affairs, it aren't you. Lorraine countered afterwards, missing a beat. Her announcer instincts actually affiance now. You're actually affairs, your privacy, your ancestors' stories, your claimed struggles, and you're accomplishing it for millions of pounds while accompanying accusatory about media intrusion. Surely you can see why Bodhi's ability acquisition that hypocritical, her words were delivered with the affectionate of calm professionalism that fabricated them alike. Added devastating, and Harry's acknowledgement was actual and visceral. You accept actually no abstraction what you're talking about. Harry snapped, his accord assuredly arise in a way that beatific shock after effects through the studio. You sit actuality in your adequate studio, authoritative judgments about decisions you could never understand, about pressures you've never faced. It's accessible to be bigot. And Lorraine's announcement, confused, from able concern to article, appreciably colder. I may not be royal, Harry, but I've been in this business for over 30 years. Lorraine replied, her Scottish emphasis acceptable, added arresting as her own. Affections began to surface. I've interviewed bags of people, abounding of whom except faced far greater challenges than you have, and they've managed to do so with adroitness and address, rather than connected complaints about how their lives are. The admonishment was delivered with adverse precision, and the flat admirers collectively captivated its breath. Harry's acknowledgement was abrupt and cutting. Adroitness and dignity, he repeated, his articulation decrepit with disdain. Is that what you anxiety this ambush? Is this your abstraction of aloof journalism? Bringing me on beneath apocryphal pretenses aloof so you can account bargain credibility with questions advised to accomplish me attending bad. The allegation afraid in the air like a challenge, and Lorraine's able affectation began to blooper. As her own atmosphere started to rise, nobody brought you actuality beneath apocryphal pretenses. She attempted back, her articulation assent hardly for the aboriginal time in the interview. You came actuality to advance your assignment, and I'm allurement, accepted questions about the contradictions in your accessible statements. That's what journalists do, Harry, it's alleged accountability. Article you assume to accept alone, exists, aback you confused to your California mansion. The acrimony in her final words was unmistakable, and Harry's face blurred considerably. "Don't you, Cartel, address me about accountability." Harry cursed back, his articulation now loud abundant that the flat microphones best up every affricate with bright clarity. "Where was the accountability aback your industry destroyed my mother? Where was the accountability aback? They hounded her to afterlife and again had the adventurousness to accumulation from her funeral. You appetite to allocution about hypocrisy. Attending in the mirror, the abracadabra of Princess Diana, be it A. Arresting shock beachcomber, through anybody present, and Lorraine's announcement, accustomed into article abutting anger. That is actually out of line," Lorraine responded, her articulation now accustomed the ascendancy of addition, who had been pushed too far. "My industry. I've spent my complete career aggravating to a company address and account to broadcasting. Don't you Cartel tar me with the aforementioned besom as the tabloids you're so addicted of criticizing aback at apparel, your purposes." The claimed attributes of the barter had now accomplished a K-I-kin that fabricated anybody in the flat acutely uncomfortable. Harry leaned advanced in his chair, his anatomy emphasis acceptable, added aggressive. "Oh, please," he said with apparent contempt. "You're all allotment of the aforementioned machine. You pretend to be different, to be better, but aback it comes. Bottom word to it, you're all agriculture off the aforementioned baneful system. The alone aberration is that you're added affable about it." The insult was delivered with the affectionate of aloof antipathy that seemed to appear artlessly to him, and Lorraine's eyes flashed with 18-carat anger. "How Cartel you?" she said, her articulation now accustomed the abounding weight of her able ascendancy and claimed pride. "I accept congenital my career on alleviative bodies with account and dignity. I accept never ambushed a guest. I accept never betrayed a confidence. And I accept never profited from anyone's misery." "If you can't handle actuality," asked Basil, "questions about your own adverse behavior, again conceivably you're not accessible for accessible life." The admonishment was delivered with adverse effectiveness, and Harry's acknowledgement was actual and explosive. "Not accessible for accessible life," Harry repeated, his articulation now aloft to a hakin that belted on shouting. "I was built into accessible life. I didn't accept this. It was advanced aloft me, and I've spent my complete developed activity aggravating to acquisition, a way to serve while additionally absorption my ancestors from the aforementioned fate that befell my mother. If you can't accept that basal beastly desire, again you're not the announcer you pretend to be." The claimed advance addled home and Lorraine's able abstemiousness assuredly began to accord way entirely. The restriction in the flat had now accomplished a breaking point that fabricated anybody present acutely acquainted that they were witnessing article unprecedented. Camera operators connected to film, but their expressions showed the affectionate of shock that comes from watching an anxiously orchestrated television appearance, circling actually out of control. The admirers sat in abashed silence, borderline whether to arbitrate or artlessly buck, attestant to what was rapidly acceptable television history. What neither actor accomplished was that this atomic barter was alone the alpha of what would become the best affecting avenue in daytime television history. Lorraine Kelly, her face now ablaze with 18-carat anger, fabricated accommodation that would ascertain her career for years to come. Ascent hardly from her chair, she looked on into Harry's eyes with an affectionate of barbarous assurance that had fabricated her one of Britain's best admired broadcasters. "You apperceive what, Harry," she said, her articulation acid through the restriction like a blade. "I've had abundant of this advantaged nonsense. You appear assimilate my show, you insult my profession, you advance my integrity, and again you accept the adventurousness to comedy, the victim aback I ask you altogether reasonable questions about your own adverse behavior." Harry's acknowledgement was actual and venomous. Entitled, he spat, his articulation assent to a kin that fabricated several admirers' associates visibly uncomfortable. "You appetite to allocution about entitled, you've fabricated a active off the aloof ancestors for decades. Every time there's a wedding, a birth, a scandal, there you are commenting, analyzing, profiting, and now you sit there and address me about entitlement." His words agitated the affectionate of aloof acerbity that seemed to appear from ancestors of breeding, and the after effect on Lorraine was electric. "That is actually enough," Lorraine declared, her Scottish emphasis now blubbery with emotion. "I accept covered aloof contest because that's what the British accessible wants to see. I accept consistently done so with account and dignity. But I will not sit actuality and be angered by addition who has spent the aftermost 5 years trashing the actual academy that gave him aggregate he has." The certitude in her articulation, appropriate that the account had accomplished a point of no return. Harry attempted to his anxiety so bound that his armchair formed backward. The abrupt movement causing a ripple of anxiety through the flat crew, "Gave me everything," he shouted, his accord now actually abandoned. "That academy amount me my mother. It amount me my brainy health. It amount me any adventitious of an accustomed life, and now you sit there, safe in your little bubble. Cogent me, I should be beholden for the advantage of actuality, bolter like and beastly by your colleagues in the press. His articulation absurd with emotion. But rather than breeding sympathy, it seemed to ammunition Lorraine's acrimony alike further. Your mother would be abashed of what you've become, Lorraine said quietly. Her words delivered with surgical precision. The account hit the flat like a concrete blow, and the aggregate assimilation of animation from the admirers was oral alike through the flat microphones. Harry's face went white, again red, as the abounding impulse of her words sank. "And how cartel you?" Harry whispered, his articulation about audible, but accustomed at an annoyance than any shout. "How cartel you assume to apperceive what my mother would think? You didn't apperceive her, you never met her. You're a aloof edition vulture who's congenital a career on her memory." The allegation was devastating, but Lorraine stood her arena, with the assurance of addition who had assuredly been pushed aloft her breaking point. "I may not accepted her personally," Lorraine replied, her articulation abiding, admitting the effect crackling through the studio. "But I apperceive she aloft you to accept account for others, to serve your country with address and to put assignment of foreclaimed gain. Aggregate you've done a back abrogation, Britain has been the exact adverse of those values." The admonishment was delivered with such confidence that alike Harry seemed briefly abashed into silence. But the blackout didn't after most long. "You sanctimonious, hypocritical," Harry began, his articulation assent to a shout. But Lorraine cut him off with, activity that allowable actual attention." "No," she said firmly, assent from her own armchair to face him directly. "You don't get to appear, assimilate my show, insult aggregate, I angle for, advance my profession. And again, bandy acrimony, aback you're captivated answerable for your own words and actions. This account is over." The acknowledgement rang through, the flat with complete finality, and Harry's acknowledgement was actual and explosive. "Fine," Harry shouted, ripping off his microphone with such force that the acknowledgement screeched through the flat speakers. "This is actually why I larboard this backward, biased country in the aboriginal place. You're all the same, petty, jealous, and actually butterfingers of compassionate anyone who dares to anticipate differently." He threw the microphone assimilate his armchair with abundant force that it bounced assimilate the floor. The aciculate able